Welcome to First United Methodist Church Sunday School. Whatever day of the week you're watching this, I hope you're having a wonderful day. I want to begin our lesson today from the book by Tom Berlin, who is a Methodist minister. He wrote a book called Reckless Love, and I am so excited about this because it reminds me of the purpose of everything, what we need to be doing, and how God directs us to live our lives every day. So bear with me as I translate some of his thoughts for you today. It begins with a quote from C.S. Lewis, and we've all read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Do not waste time bothering whether you will love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. That is good advice from Mr. Lewis. So in our story today, one day a teacher of the law came to Jesus and wanted to know which commandment was the most important in Jesus' mind. And you can see why, because if you've read the Old Testament or read any of the law, there are a lot of commandments. Some say there are 613 commandments. Of course, some of these commandments are positively stated. They tell you what to do, like honor your father and mother, but others come in the negative form. They tell you what not to do. Do not lie, do not lust, do not run with scissors or you'll put your eye out. Well, maybe that was your mother's law as opposed to one of the 10 commandments, but it was still good advice. Sometimes we can get bogged down in the do-nots, or sometimes we put all our effort behind the do-nots and the things we shouldn't do instead of putting forward the things we should do. Anyway, if you're trying to be obedient to God using the Hebrew Bible, there certainly was a lot to remember. This particular teacher of the law knows the law. Every day he studies the law. He could probably quote you many of those 613 commandments. But he also knows that beyond the law of Moses, even more commandments were written by men to help describe to people how to live their life for God. And he carries a unique burden because every day someone comes to him and says something like, well, I know I'm not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath, but my son is getting married and I need to take furniture over to his house, and will that be okay? So they were constantly making exceptions to a law that was so strenuous it was difficult to follow it. So he's actually hoping Jesus will distill this all down to the most important thing. There are others in that audience who are hoping Jesus will make a mistake, and they'll be able to say, aha, we knew he was not the Son of God. We knew he was not the Messiah. But as he asked this question, the crowd goes quiet. Jesus says, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. Mark 12:29 and 30. Jesus' followers smiled because they know he nailed it. He quoted what Jewish people call the Shema. This text was first found in Deuteronomy 6:4 and 6. And it is the first part of a prayer that the Jewish people say every single day. They share it in worship in synagogue, and it is a confession of their faith, that they do love the Lord their God. The word listen or hear in Hebrew is Shema, and this is the name of this verse in the Hebrew law. Everyone agreed that it was the greatest commandment. You could hear them all going, yeah, and their heads were shaking. One God, love your Lord your God, and he is one God. Just think about what it was like in this first century and who was ruling the Hebrew children in that day. It was the Romans. And their gods and goddesses were a strange bunch. It was like watching the Kardashians on TV. You think about Jupiter, who was a control freak. He was almost eaten by his father Saturn, but his mother saved him. His wife Hera was so jealous she turned women into monsters and once threw their own daughter off a mountain. Eros had a love addiction, and Neptune was ill-tempered and unpredictable, always causing thunder and lightning in the sky. Diana feared relationships and hunted alone. Don't you see what I mean? Just like a soap opera. They had issues, believe me, and if you moved into their neighborhood, you would probably want to move back out by the end of the week. Not only that, the people in this time of life also had to remember which God to pray for whichever things they wanted. From good crops to children, who got good grades, who didn't talk back to their parents. So the idea of one God would be so great for these people. Gods with superpowers, but mood swings were not the kind of gods they want. So when the Jews said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone is one God," it wasn't just an affirmation, it was a relief. This one God, they believed, created everything and everyone. And even in the ancient history, when the Old Testament was written, there were always other gods to whom other peoples from other countries prayed. But the God of the land and the God who created the oceans was the God of the Israelites, even in this day. The God of Israel endowed us with intellect and strength, gave us a responsibility to care for the creation in which we live, and it's a partnership. When you go your own way and demonstrate that you're irresponsible, sometimes downright mean and selfish, God gave commandments to call you to be a better person. When you did life God's way, you became trustworthy and kind. People wondered what had happened to you and how had you changed like that, because they knew you before you knew God. Isn't that a wonderful thing for someone to look at how we were and look at how we are and say, I see the change of Jesus in this person's life. Back then, though, you were like everyone else. Sometimes you were a real jerk, but now you have a whole new way of life, and you understand that the way of life that God has given you is a real gift. Israel loved God because he was, in a word, lovely. When people varied from their love of God and they made other things a priority, whether it was their own desires or the temptation to make commitments more important than their commitment to God, sin was called idolatry, oftentimes because of that very reason, that people put other things or things they cared more about than God. Now, we can do that in today's life too, when we get so busy, when we decide we have a ball game to go to, or something that takes the priority from our early morning prayer. But this commandment to love God was so important in the formation of the generations of the Israelite people that they were told to teach it to their children as early as they could understand it. They were commanded to wear it on their person and place it in the doorway of their home so they would be reminded of it whenever they went into the world or returned to their family. This love for God was not just a feeling they sometimes carried or a sensation. To love God with all your being was to live God's way. It was the organizing principle of every day of their lives. Only through this unqualified love could the one God become the unifying agent in the life of the individual, family, and nation. This is why Jesus so often talked about the importance of the condition of our heart. To love God fully, you have to consider two important questions. What bad things need to be cast out, and what good things need to be brought in? That's a question I could ask myself every day, and those lists wouldn't be even. I need to work on this just like we all do. But then Jesus paused for a breath and he said, "The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these." This is found in Mark 12:31. While the books of the Bible Jesus' followers would have heard read in the synagogue certainly spoke of the importance of loving one's neighbor in a variety of ways, Jesus was doing something different here. Now remember, all of their written word at this time was really the written word from before Jesus' birth. But what they were doing now was hearing, and the disciples were learning, being taught what to teach, and later the Holy Spirit would guide them what to write. So hearing this next word from Jesus was something that would have been completely new to them. So they had heard in the Old Testament, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." This is Leviticus 19:18. But Jesus offers something quite powerful. He says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." There is no other commandment greater than these two. Think about that. We heard that there's all kinds of laws, all kinds of commandments, all kinds of explanations for all of these laws and commandments. But now he's saying, here are two. If you love your neighbor as yourself. And it sounds like a good idea to love your neighbor. It sounds virtuous and beautiful. And can you imagine that you were in that crowd and standing around there, and Jesus said that, and you took a look over there, and you saw the guy who stays up late at night drinking wine and playing his lute and keeping everybody up, you think, I have to love him. And then you think about that busybody that you meet when you go to the well to get water, and she's like, you know, who's watching your children while you're down here? I worry about your kids, especially that little one. He looks like trouble. Or you think about the guy you buy fish from every day, and you wonder that the scales he weighs your fish on, are they skewed in his favor and you get less fish than you pay for? And then you think about, how am I supposed to love these guys? Well, maybe I'll just love everybody else and I won't have to love them. But that's not what Jesus said. That is not what he said. It is very complex to keep these two commandments. There is a great deal of love in the world, and it's important to remember this as we think of the power of these commandments, because Jesus puts the actions together, loving God and loving others. It is assumed in cultures many times that this happens, but if we don't apply it to our lives, we may find that it doesn't. When we're influenced by Christianity, the expressions of love in the form of basic courtesy, kindness, and thoughtfulness are normal. And we know the people we want to be, but at the same time, we struggle to love even those closest to us. Families have conflicts. You've often heard of families who turn their children out because they've disappointed them. Spouses have hot arguments or cold neglect. Schedules can even become so busy there's no time to be thoughtful or attentive to those around you. We hold grudges against others that expand like fast-growing vines, and sometimes we don't even remember why we're angry. We just know that we are. But loving others is a tall order. It's easy to think that if we learn to love God deeply enough, then loving our neighbor will be accomplished through the overflow of that relationship. Because Paul listed the qualities and experience when he said in his letter to the Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. However, there is another truth. It is only when we commit to love our neighbor and intentionally accomplish this goal that we learn what it means to fully love God. When I love my neighbor, I experience the rewarding feeling that comes when I'm kind to another person, or when I surprise someone with a thoughtful act that they appreciate and didn't expect. When I love my neighbor, I build up existing relationships and begin new ones. Conversely, loving my neighbor is the fastest way to identify all the rough spots on my soul, all those things that can prevent me from being the kind of neighbor I should be and cause me to turn inward towards selfishness. Wouldn't it be great if there was a treatment for sin-fouled lives? By yoking these two commandments together, love of God and love of neighbor, Jesus offers us a way to keep our souls free over time. The pattern of loving God and loving neighbor creates a cycle that becomes a powerful outcome in the life of a Christian. As we dedicate ourselves to loving God, we gain the ability to see ourselves clearly. And we often think of love as a concept. What is love? We say it's in our heart, we say it's here, we say it's in our head, but we know it is that overwhelming desire we have to connect with another person, to feel love and to feel loved in return. We want to be a loving spouse or parent, a loving friend or neighbor, and that sounds good and it even sounds easy. But Jesus is calling us to love not as a concept, but as a verb. To accomplish this work, it takes a lifetime. And it must be the centering principle of our days. It must be in part of our conversations. It must influence our outlook on life. At the same time, loving our neighbors helps us appreciate the beauty of God in new ways. You find yourself more attracted to God. You find yourself understanding and appreciating God. The link that Christ made by joining these two commandments was not linear, it was circular. Loving God enables me to love my neighbor. Loving my neighbor enables me to fully love God. And so it goes. This is true not only because my neighbor carries a unique reflection of the image of God. Didn't he tell us that we're made in the image of God? But it's also the act of loving another is fundamental and is part of God's character and being. John 1 states, "Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God." So it's important to understand why this was important to Jesus. Christ's goal is nothing less than full transformation of our lives. He desires for us to gain the same loving nature as our Creator. Where do we begin to keep the great commandment? At the beginning, here are 3 powerful words. Begin with love. Say these 3 words out loud or consider them in your mind when you first wake up in the morning. They'll have a great effect on your day. Open your eyes in the morning and think, begin with love. And you will probably start your day in prayer to the God who loves you, offering gratitude for your life. When you have your first conversation of the day, think again. Begin with love, and you'll be far more likely to listen in a way that honors the person and talk with them about things that interest them. Later in the day, you'll drive somewhere, and someone will drive right up on your bumper, flash their lights, and you will immediately start to think of what you're going to do to signal them your discomfort or your frustration. Why not instead begin with love and just put your turn signal on and get in the other lane and let them pass you? Who knows? They are late for work, something is happening. The last thing we want to do is assume their worst intention. Beginning with love assumes the best intention of the other person. And that's what we're trying to do right here, is we're beginning with love. And when we interact with people we don't know well, this love will show because we'll be kind and considerate. If we go to the grocery store, would that we could. Most of us pick up our groceries now because we don't want to go. But if there's a new person behind the cash register who isn't sure of what the code number is for an avocado, or as one asked me one time, what's this green thing called? Well, instead of us looking down on that person or saying something unkind to that person or expecting them to know everything, what if we said, hey, I think I've bought that before and it is such and such. Beginning with love lets us be kind to others, and what a difference that can make in our day. It prevents sin from taking up residence in our soul. Love is not a principle in which we believe. It is not an aspiration we hope to attain. It is an orientation that sets the course of our day through our words and our actions. To begin with love dramatically impacts how you listen, what you say, how you say it, assumptions you make. When you begin with love, you assume the best about others instead of the worst. The mind of a person who says begin with love is more thoughtful of others. In matters small and large, you will begin to bless people around you in ways that may surprise both you and them. These 3 powerful words, when intentionally spoken, will set the course of words, assumption, and actions of a people who honors the great commandment to love God and neighbor. When we do this and it becomes a part of our circle of relationships, we won't have to try to remember it because it will be something that comes to us first. It will be our first action. And the Lord is pushing us to activate this. When we learn to love that particular hard-to-love neighbor, you'll discover things about God and stand in wonder of God in ways you would not have discovered without that neighbor. This week, begin with love. Assume the best intentions of others and love the Lord your God with all your heart. And I wish you a blessed week.